Hello and welcome to Destroy Before Listening episode 4, which is a conversation between myself, Pete Byrne, and Martin SHIFT, who does the industrial noise project SHIFT, which started in Sweden in the late 90s and then moved to the UK in the 2000s, and is now back in Sweden at the start of the year after getting married. We met via a message board and made friends because of the label he was doing, Unrest Productions, who I'd help him out with and stuff. And I just remember there was lots of phone calls over logistics and things like that. Martin is very straight ahead and intense about his music, but he's always had my respect, especially with what he's achieved and his uncompromising DIY mentality. This was my first time interviewing someone, but it turned out great and really interesting. Even though he was in rural Sweden and didn't have a stable internet connection, it worked out well. The final track is from the Altamont Rising album, which he did in 2014, and I think that's available on his Bandcamp page. It's basically, if you like your hardcore industrial, then you won't be disappointed with that. So if you like this, then please, subscribe and share and just tell people about it. And there's also the Instagram page, which is at Destroy Before Listening, where the relevant flyers and photos and things will be posted. Okay, thanks. Well, the first point is obviously you grew up in Sweden and then moved to the UK. So it was just how the formative years of, growing up in Sweden and the kind of music you were exposed to and what kind of led you to, the formation of a musical project.
Well, where to start? I could start with my older brother, having a brother that's 8 years older than me, who would always bring all sorts of, at the time, strange music home. So I would say from the age of 3, maybe 4, I was listening to music that was probably very advanced for a kid that age. I mean, I particularly remember one occasion where I was 6 and he came home with a tape and I was listening to some shit disco music from some compilation I found. And he told me to turn that crap off.
Listen to this
and
shit.
Listen to this. And it was Kraftwerk's The Robot. And I had never heard anything like it in my life.
Yeah.
So he left that on and walked out of the room, and I kept rewinding that tape over and over and just listening to it. I must have listened to it 20 times. And was at times walking around the room in what I imagined would be like a robot. It had such a massive impact, but that's only one of the details I can remember from him, because it was a constant barrage of excellent music from him, from maybe between the age of 3 to 13, 14, when I started exploring by myself.
Well, that's lucky to have, because I didn't know that kind of views because obviously it does, more often than not, it comes from brothers and sisters and things, and exposure that way. So I hadn't known that your brother, obviously if he's that bit older, he's going to have, a fair bit more experience musically. So
well, I mean, he had bands. He had bands as well, so there was always people around. His bedroom, which was in a separate building to the house, was a massive rehearsal studio full of guitar amps and drum kits and you name it. And there's always people there playing music. And I learned how to play the drums myself from the age of 4 by just playing his drums. So that was a constant. But I was also blessed to have one of the top music journalists of Sweden in the village, just down the road, just 2K from where I live. and I went to school with his son, so quite often I'd be there. And that was a place where you could, I mean, there's no end to the music you could find there. When I'd, at 13, discovered Neubauten, you could go to his house and there'd be Neubauten LPs
right.
you could tape. So the first time I came into contact with Front 2 for 2 was that there was a 7-inch sent in the mail to him that we played, and that's also when I was 13. So he was a second gateway, I suppose, to the music, various types of music.
So was it the like a more electronic or industrial type bands that you gravitated towards when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, but by the age of 13, that's what I gravitated towards. There were some older kids in the village as well who were, totally into synth, which I at first rejected. But being of that age and at that curiosity that you have at that age, I thought they looked cool.
Yeah.
So I befriended them, and soon enough, I think I must have been 13 then as well when I heard SDK for the first time.
Is this would this be like Depeche Mode and Cabaret Voltaire and things like bands like that, groups?
Yeah, all of that, and also that through my brother and one of his friends, who was a music journalist at the time. He's now a huge TV star in Sweden. I don't need to name him, but they took me along. I was 12 then. They took me along to see a French band called Unrest, which they are fucking massive in France to this day, but they are virtually unknown outside of France. They had a few hits in Sweden and played to a crowd of maybe 1,000 people, and that was my first real gig I went to, and they were considered a synth band at the time, and that was a massive influence. I mean, not just the band, but also seeing all the people all dressed in black and weird hair and the rest.
Nice. I don't know.
So yeah.
What about? I mean, did punk figure into, or like the kind of DIY ideas, aesthetic or punk? Not initially, but I know when you were doing when you like later on, it's it's very, you had a strong do-it-yourself attitude to your music and presentation.
Well, that punk, not so much. I mean,
the idea,
the extent,
maybe not the.
Yeah. Not really. I didn't think about it in those terms. I mean, punk had featured from quite a young age in the form of my brother having Sex Pistols record at home and some Clash, but I don't think it went further than that. And the whole DIY ethic I mean, obviously it existed because me and my mates, who were about the same age, we started a band and just played with whatever crap that we had. I mean, Joel, whose dad was the guy who was a high level music journalist. He had some decent synths and stuff at home, but me and the other guy, Frederick, we just had junk. But we played with what we had, and we made our own posters and played gigs locally, and we were pretty fucking awful, of course. But we, I mean, the DIY ethic was there, but it wasn't a conscious idea that, we were part of some kind of DIY movement or something. We just thought we were playing synth music to the best of our abilities, to the best of our 13-year-old abilities.
So is this like late 80s, early 90s?
This would have been 85.
Mid-80s.
Yeah.
So then that just developed on. How did that transition into the 90s, or what was that? The feeling?
Well, I mean, there's a giant leap between 85 and the 90s because soon enough I developed a taste for darker harsher stuff, for want of a better word, whereas these other two, they were more about the synth pop, I think. So we fell out, and I did my own thing, and they got absorbed into another local band, another synth pop band. Who actually, that band actually featured in a documentary that was on Swedish television at the time, which wasn't about the band. It was just a documentary about the dreary life in a rural shithole. But by that point, we're talking about 86, and I'd gotten to know people outside and in Malmo and started dabbling there, trying things out. Not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
But certainly getting to know people.
Okay. And then, I don't know, how does it change? Did it change with meeting, I guess, all the other people, like peer group, like the newer sort of sound that would would be the next decade?
Well, I mean, what happened was that after having lived out there for 7-8 years, my family went from there. I mean, we're talking Swedish deliverance country here. So the place was full of violent, drunken farmer types who fucked you up for not listening to heavy metal. So we sold up and moved out of there and settled in a suburb to Malmo, which I was 14 then, and that was massively liberating because I could get on a coach and just go to Malmo and be there in 25 minutes, which meant I could go to the Haven at the time, which was a venue called Stadt Hamburg, which if anyone from my age, from Malmo or the south of Sweden, hears me mention that name, that means something. I would say, if anything, we're talking gateways into music, that would have been the third gateway. That place was iconic, and I eventually ended up working
right. And they're like record shops as well, obviously.
Yeah, there were record shops. I mean, there were loads of record shops in Malmo back then, but perhaps the most prominent for getting hold of EBM and synth stuff and some industrial would have been what's that place called? There's a place called Jukebox. It doesn't exist anymore.
So was it easy to come by imports living in?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I mean, I didn't know. I had no idea where to look. I wasn't part of this industrial scene that I tend to hear about, where people were ordering from obscure catalogs and stuff like that. I was too young and I was too on the outside for that. I mean, I was certainly searching for it, having heard Neubauten, early Cabaret Voltaire, and not least SBK. SBK was a revelation when I first heard that at 13. When I managed to save up enough money at 14, I bought Leichenschrei on LP, which, well, that copy is long gone now.
Did you? What about literature or like zines and stuff? Did you see the research, the industrial handbook for information, things like that?
I think I came across the Industrial Culture Handbook when I was 15. So I was quite young, and I mean, similar to my reaction to having heard SBK, the reading what some of the people in there had to say on things was like discovering another species. It was people coming from an angle so different to what I'd seen around me, or at least I thought so. That the Industrial Culture Handbook was an absolute revelation, and it continued to be as I reread it and rediscovered it over the years.
Yeah, that's. I mean, the so you've got like definite points where, you know, things really like flipped around, like your perception of music or like what you could do. So how did this feed into like the origin, well, the beginnings of, you know, what would become Shift? Because when did that start?
That started in '97. After I'd been, well, I would say at least two bands that I'd been in at that point, of some ambitious goals, both of them, that had come to nothing. One of them in a very disappointing and acrimonious way. The other one just petered out. And I decided I'd had enough of working with others. More so, I'd had enough of independence on making music with others.
Yeah.
On a whole, I mean, I had, during the 90s, considered what I was doing more in an electronic field rather than industrial, although that featured too. But I mean, I would say at that point, I was more influenced by things like Doc DVA, Late Skinny Puppy, Severed Heads, Young Gods to an extent, but also the whole Warp thing, the Alltecker and Aphex Twin and so forth, and was trying to marry those up. Obviously, the Clinic as well. The Clinic was a massive thing. But at the climax in the Swedish synth scene in the 90s, at least to me, just seemed to be all about nostalgia and all about synth pop. And first of all, I would say the synth pop was shit. It was fucking awful. Because for it to be pop, you need pop songs. And these people couldn't write fucking pop songs. They were shit. You listen to Pet Shop Boys, that's pop. That's great pop music. These people couldn't write a song to save their lives. And as for synth, it didn't have that coldness. It just didn't have the focus and the harshness to it. It was just fucking bollocks. And I got fed up with it in the end, because you were either that or you were out of it. So having made music for a time and tried to get somewhere with it, I just got tired of it and quit. And that came off the back of having done my national service as well, which led me into the fire service. So for the next 5, maybe even 6 years, I focused everything on joining the fire service.
Yeah. Also, is this so you joined the fire service in Sweden first and then transferred?
No. Well, the way it worked was we used to have a national service in Sweden, so everyone had to do something. Now, if you weren't fit enough or able, or just able to do the military side of it, there was always civilian options that you could choose. So through many strange routes, I ended up being trained as an auxiliary fireman. And that was a 5-month period where I spent 2 months at one of the training centers, which is, by the way, absolute top of the range, world-class training centers for the fire service. And then I spent 3 months at the main or the central fire station in Malmö, which is quite a busy place, and also a place that was very different to where I'd come from. Not having had a job for a while, and just bumbled around with music, organizing gigs and making music myself. Suddenly I found myself with a bunch of pretty tough, straight talking, working class guys who took no shit. I loved it. I loved it there. I discovered a whole different side to myself while doing that. And
so was this what was the idea behind the move? Because like for anyone who doesn't know, you moved from Sweden to England, and then like I knew you as a fireman. That's what your role was when you came over here.
Well, perhaps a bit more background to this, because I had the venue I was talking about, Stadt Hamburg. I had ended up being kind of a manager for it, and we had moved around a bit in Malmo as well, up until about 96 or 97, when it definitely ended, much through the authorities not outright shutting us down, but making it impossible for us to stay where we were. It was typical Malmo bullshit. That's the way it's always been. The people who run the city, they do all they can to stifle any form of initiative, any form of culture that they don't deem suitable. And the two suitable cultures in Malmo are football or boring old jazz. If you're none of those, you can get fucked. So that's what happened to us. And what Malmo became after Stadt Hamburg had disappeared, it was so fucking bleak and so dreary for someone like me who had grown up in this magical place, that was a reason not to stay there. Another reason was that following my national service and deciding I wanted to become a fireman, realizing the nepotism in the Swedish fire service at the time. So an ex-girlfriend of mine who lived in England suggested, why don't you try England? So I started looking into that, and actually the options there were much more open, much more fair, and long story short, I ended up joining as a whole-time firefighter in the UK in 2001. So between 96 and 2001, I spent virtually all my time and all my efforts to join in the fire service.
Okay, and then as that sounds like a bit of a like a massive, like a cultural shift, going from going from rural Sweden to then coming to the UK, which is, I don't know. I mean, I can only imagine it going the opposite way. It just must be quite strange at first. It's a strange thing to get your head around, the way people speak to each other and the way culture is, or work.
Well, I mean, I had lived in England for the first 4 years of my life anyway, so I had the language. I spoke English before I spoke Swedish.
So were you born here?
I wasn't born in England. I was born in Sweden, but my parents or my father worked in England at the time. So between the age of 3 months and 4 years, I lived in the UK, and then we moved back to Sweden. So the bonds between me and my family in England are quite strong. There's always been a bond between the two countries. So England wasn't totally new to me. What was new to me was, without wanting to be condescending, was the shittier side of the working class culture of the UK. That was something I was.
Well, there's plenty.
I was not
plenty of that. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make no bones about it that for as great as my time has been as a firefighter, I also experienced a sadistic cruelty to certain traits of the English psyche and the English culture that I've never seen anywhere else. Not necessarily a bad thing, because it gives you perspective, and it also gifts you survival instincts that I certainly didn't have when I lived in Sweden.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because you don't really. A lot of people don't get behind the understanding of other people or other people's countries and like cultures and like what it means to be Swedish or whatever nation, you know.
I mean, what still baffles me is, I mean, what turned me on with the fire service initially was going to this station in Malmo where the blokes were tough and they took no shit. But if you were seen to try and to make an effort, nothing was impossible, and you'd have everyone encouraging you. It's a very encouraging environment, and I took it for granted that it could be no other way. But of course, coming to the English fire service, I saw a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people who think that the way to run things is to kick others. And it doesn't matter how hard you try, the harder you try or the more you reach out for help, the more they see it as an opportunity to kick you, which that's what I'm referring to when I talk about the sadistic side to parts of the English psyche. I've never seen that anywhere else. I don't know. I don't quite understand where that type of cruelty comes from. But you're in that environment, so you either live or you die. And quite often I've found that aggression wins the day. So once you start kicking back, then that opens up a whole different world of opportunities, which is interesting.
Yeah. So, well, to get back onto like the musical side of things as well, as when did things sort of really pick up or feel like you could start making music in over here?
What happened was that my ideas of what my career was going to look like in the fire service didn't quite happen, and so I just decided that rather than sacrificing myself on the altar of the fire service, I could actually have a life outside of it. And the life outside of it for me was a no-brainer. It was going back to making music. So I still had a lot of my gear, so I just started making music again.
So is this what equipment were you using then? What equipment did you bring over?
What did I have?
What were you recording on? Yeah,
I would say I still have my old DAT, which still to this day I miss it dearly because it sounded great. I had a sampler, and Sonic EPS. So I just went back to those. I went back to the gear that I knew and started using it. And I think after having been inactive for so long, I stumbled from, I think it took me till about 2005 until I had any real idea of how to do things and what I actually wanted to do. Before that, it was a lot of observing others, listening, and just looking.
What about the scene? Because I know the way we came to meet was, it was like, it's funny thinking about it, you know, because it was very pre social media. The social media was really, it was like message boards. It was like it was the arse end of like, what was it, like the doom metal forum, the Southern Lord forum on that, and like around that time there was a load of people, especially from the Northeast, were on there, and UK. There was way more heavily weighted towards people from the UK than Americans. You know, it's probably 90% UK, wasn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Southern Lord Forum was interesting because it just seemed to hoover up people from all over the place. It wasn't just metal. I mean, I certainly don't come from a metal background.
I don't think anyone did particularly.
Although that place was just hugely inspiring because it was a sharing place. There were a lot of old timers. There were a lot of new people. There was a mix of people there, and there was a lot of sharing going on. And you could always ask. You couldn't log on there without discovering new music daily.
I mean,
and that made it a fascinating
I think
place.
it was quite a nice place as well. Well, in thinking back, I don't know if I'm, if it's idealizing something, but like it did feel. I mean, there was a bit of like, it wasn't serious like nastiness or anything. There was people take the piss,
No.
but it generally felt, because a lot of people on there were on like SoulSeek as well, like file sharing. So it would just be like, oh, you want this music? Oh, you can just, here's my username. Or there'd be like people's username, a thread, which is people's usernames on something like that, SoulSeek or like trading, or if someone had records they were selling or trading, it was trying to think of the idea. Like it was communal, wasn't it, really?
Well, I mean, just take for example, I once asked around about esoteric. And before I knew it, I had a private message for Doomlord, who we all remember,
Doomlord, great.
who had a bunch of CDRs that he'd burnt for me and asking for my address. Yeah. That was the philosophy of the place. That was how that place worked. It was a sharing place. And like I said, you couldn't log on there without discovering new music daily.
I mean, big respect to like people like Doomlord. Yeah, like people who were kind of positive, I suppose. Even though the music may be negative, but like they were.
Well, exactly. I mean, that guy is into some pretty fucking dark and warped stuff, but he's still there sharing all this if there's anyone that shows an interest. And I mean, I've been on numerous noise forums, for example, and you couldn't ask for a bunch of shittier, more stuck up people. I mean, you can't even have a laugh in places like that. But the Southern Lord Forum, which was full of very dark, very negative music and energy and topics, it's people just shared and were ever so keen on schooling each other or educating each other. And there'd be some guys there who went far back enough to having seen some of the legendary US hardcore bands. They'd seen them in basements and living rooms and stuff like that. And they were on there and they weren't stuck up about it. They were just ever so happy to share their stories, their experiences and any knowledge. And that made the place very, very fertile ground, especially for someone like me who had been outside of music for some time and was looking
of some kind,
looking in.
I think this is why, in a way, I wanted to do something like this, because it feels more along those lines again. Like the feel of this, like this medium. It's, but because I kind of like the past 10 years, it's just the whole social media. It didn't mean anything anymore. It wasn't it wasn't a conversation. It was a very one-sided conversation, if there was one. It's just a bunch of people shouting and in a room, and then it's whoever's shouting the most shit. It's boring. But if you can kind of add something that's more like positive or like informative, that's understanding people a bit better, I don't know.
But I mean, there's always going to be the freaks who are looking for this stuff, and they may not even know it, but eventually they'll stumble across it. But without sitting here moaning too much about it or focusing too much on it, but imagine that your first port of call when you stumble on into this is you go to one of those American noise forums where the opinion is capital and that is used to stomp all over you because you don't know everything. Who would want to be involved in that? I certainly don't. I've spent probably the last 10 years with those types of forums, either ignoring them or being wound up by them. It doesn't give anything to me. It's just fucking one-upmanship. It's bollocks. But that's very typical for the noise scene anyway. There is no capital. There's no money. There's no sales. There's no success as such. So the success and the capital is your opinion and your knowledge. And when if you've been in long enough and you've seen this or that and you know a lot of stuff, a lot of those people tend to use it to just stamp on others rather than trying to involve others or share, which that's the difference between the Southern Lord Forum, the way it was for those 5 or 6 golden years.
It's the 2000s.
Up until what I saw after.
It's the 2000s, really, that things sort of nearing the end of, I definitely felt nearing the end of that time.
Yeah.
Things had definitely like slipped, and maybe I'd changed my ideas, and, you know, people have different things coming to interests, you know, and that's like, it's one thing that's not really interesting. You're getting into like beef with people, you know, you're getting older and just like, fuck this, you know, just kind of, you know, want to talk about like interesting
It's pointless.
things.
It's pointless. You can't even comment or start something without people using it for one-upmanship. So what's the point? Utterly fucking pointless. So yeah, I agree with you. I've steered clear of it as much as I could. There are more inspiring things to do than that, as in
look at a wall,
getting active. Look at a wall, yeah. But I mean, you know, to further on with the Southern Lord Forum, the way it was, it has led to lasting connections with people, like you and I, for example. That's where we got to know each other. But
well, yeah, I mean, it was because there was such a limited like time when we were involved with like the records, and things were a lot more, you know, it was a lot more small scale, the reach, although it felt there was a wider thing that felt quite distant, but then within the UK and within like it was more enclosed, and it felt like there was you know, people were supporting different types of things, because I didn't know when I first, like, what your music was about. You probably didn't really know, but then you kind of get an idea of, I don't know, you get a better idea of each other. It's more like personality or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was also looking at connecting with people in the UK.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be, or wherever they were. I mean, I had a fairly clear idea of what I was going to do or what I wanted to do. I just hadn't quite worked out the formula for how to do it. I always knew that the music I was going to make would be electronic of some description, of some dark description. But through the Southern Lord Forum, I got to know people like you, people like Mike in Boburn. Yeah. And it was basically the Northeast where I took my first serious musical steps in the UK. I think that was where I got the foothold first. So I got to know a lot of very welcoming, very supportive, very enthusiastic people. And that was, I mean, the Northeast at the time, I think, had a unique scene, because you had the arty people mixing with heavy metal scumbags, and then,
yeah, it was,
industrial trash people like me. And it was a big mix, and a lot of people were doing things together, and it was a very fertile ground at the time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just like in a retrospect, you think like, you know, there was actually something happening. Like there was a point in time, and then a lot of people came together, started doing things, making music, and involved with releases and labels, and, you know, yeah, it definitely kicked off. It did. I don't know if it's like that, what it's like now, because, I don't know, times are just so different, and everything's just, you know, where do you begin?
It seemed that it petered out about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know what's left of what was up in Newcastle anymore. Maybe Bong and their various projects, but forgive me for being ignorant. I don't know if there is a lot more left from up there from that
from
time.
the time period. Yeah, it's doubtful. There's only really like Mike Vest, Bong, who from that time who's still around, and Culver, like they still go. There's only maybe 2-3 people from that time period still doing this, like a similar thing, but then just changes, isn't it? I mean, I was going to ask about that as well, because we both witnessed going from, you say, you've got the CDs, vinyls, tapes, things, the 90s, and then it switches pretty dramatically into MP3s and things getting shared that way. And then the sort of like death or dying out of certain things like or CDs, but then watching other things come back in big time, like tapes. I never thought I'd see tapes again to the extent which they've ended up at. And then through to like the past 10 years, it's been like a mix from that to the like direct to streaming into people using Bandcamp and things like that to release things. So just your experiences or thoughts of that transition.
Well, I mean, the brief history of the label was it started off very ambitiously and I think too unfocused.
Yeah, this is Unrest, like we're talking about. So
Unrest Productions, yeah. I mean, around 2009, I changed my perspective on things. Certainly, the UK scene as it was then, and I distanced myself from that. And having wasted money on various formats and stuff, there's one thing I realized I could do well, and that I could also build a new foundation on, was doing tapes. So that's all I did. I think I did tapes only for the next year and a half, just putting aside what little money I made off them, and eventually managed to take the step into doing LPs. CDs at the time was not something that was working for me, at least not in terms of sustaining a label. So tapes have been around since I started Unrest in 2006. 2006. I've done tapes all along, so that's always been a seller as far as I'm concerned. What has changed with the tapes is that they've actually become quite expensive to make, which I think defeats the purpose, because you're now on the cusp of a tape costing as much as a CD, which I think is pointless, or it's getting pointless.
The same thing.
And of course, you also have...
The same thing happened with, because you did 7 inches as well, but like 7 inches now are just...
Yeah.
They're just astronomical. The price of a 7 inch when I was, growing up, it was like a couple of quid. Now it's the price of that you used to pay for an album. It's like, 7-8 quid or something, which just seems insane.
You can do a 7 inch if you're willing to lose money on it.
Yeah.
Or you can do a 7 inch if you are popular enough, you have enough of a following who are willing to pay ridiculous money for it because it's limited or it's anything like that. That's it. You don't put up a 7 inch because you don't have enough money for an LP. That's pointless. Then you may as well just do a tape.
Yeah, well, there's that, and I was thinking, well, that's a kind of which, it's almost like what comes first. You've got like do you have a digital sort of release and then the tape or the 7 inch to the side of it, or do you have the physical and then have the digital to the side of that? Because it seems it feels, well, it seems like there's the tapes and the things, and that's like a side to the like the digital now, because people can just get things really easily streaming wise.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's opening up a whole new, yet to be explored world for myself. Is that I've only just started a band camp for Unrest, so this is something that I'm yet to learn about and discover some more. But I mean, I've found it hilarious on many occasions. You get someone order a tape, or you get someone order an LP, and that's the format it's on, nothing else. And you get a pissed off email with the download code. Well, why do you buy a fucking tape then? If you're only going to listen to it digitally, why do you buy a tape? Or why do you spend 25, 30 pounds on an LP? That just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not against convenience, and I'm not against adding download codes to things in the future, but I just don't understand that. You go and buy a physical format at some cost, and then you're pissed off that you can't download it.
Yeah, I just thought there's a lot of points in time in the past couple of years I've just been kind of like, fuck me, I just couldn't believe it. The day when I saw like a record bin when I was in Sainsbury's or somewhere, it's had all the kind of reissues of fucking Fleetwood Mac Rumours or something like that. All these like classic records, they're all pressed up, but they're sitting in a supermarket. And then the idea when we were starting out doing labels, early 2000s, of that you could just throw it out there on, Bandcamp, and people could stream your music. It would just, I don't know, be like a revolutionary idea now. But like, I don't know, what's your feeling towards this kind of these changes that you've seen?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's nothing you can do about it. If you don't like it, then there's nothing you can do about it anyway.
Give into that one soon enough, I think.
Yeah. Secondly, without having the age-old conversation about music losing its value because it's everywhere and so forth, because we've done that 100 times as well. I because of the times we're in with the coronavirus and what have you, for Unrest at least, I can't do physical releases right now. Times are too uncertain, and post services across the world aren't working properly. Some of them are totally shut. So,
well, it's the infrastructure's got to be there, hasn't it? So without that,
yeah. So in that void, and in that this period of boredom, I decided to start up a band camp and throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. And I got some good advice from Tesco when I did it, because they run their band camp very successfully. So it's worth asking them their opinion and to get some advice. And so far, it's been okay. I mean, I'd still maintain that I don't find it the most interesting of formats. For me, I still love the idea of a big vinyl LP or a fold-out CD or a tape that you sit down and you design and you have it printed and all of that. That's where my interest lies. As far as I'm concerned, that's what running a label is about. But in the absence of that, doing Bandcamp, I mean, it's different. It's certainly a new way of doing things, and as such, it's not a bad. It wasn't a bad decision on my behalf. There's one thing that I'm still struggling to get used to is the fact that you see people buy your records from there, and you realize that you don't have to pack anything and you don't have to go to the post office. That's odd. That's an odd thing to watch. That money comes in and you don't have to do anything for it.
Well, this is why it's become the prevailing idea, format, concept of like the 21st century. That's that everything else sort of is the old time, and this is the new time. And in a way, it's strange that like we didn't really. Well, I don't know who did see it, but like I certainly didn't. I had no idea that it was still such a like a full circle thing almost, isn't it? It's like it's hard to know where it begins and where it ended and what came in where and how this affects that, and it's just it's more of a like a chaotic idea, music maybe.
Well,
the distribution of it.
Absolutely. I think as far as that is concerned, if you're lucky enough to have a following from before and a name from before, then it works quite comfortably. If you don't have that, if you're just starting out, I could be wrong, but I imagine that you are swimming in a massive ocean together with a lot of other small fish, and to try and get noticed, I don't know. Well, I suppose it happens.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have the faintest idea of what it was like to be 20 years old and start up a label.
No, I think it's maybe got something to do with the subdivision of a genre over like 10, 20 years, 30 years, you know, how it's become so, like every end of it becomes so niche. You don't I think it was, 20 years ago, it was like noise, or it was noise from Japan, or it was power electronics. That was about it. But then now there's these further steps on of these things taken to the limit,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'll say one thing that has been heartening to see since I opened up the Bandcamp, and I think it's only 3 weeks ago now, is that there are a few names there that they've either ordered a little bit, but maybe once or twice a year, or they used to order more in the past but have disappeared. I've seen these names appear there, and some of them are buying quite a lot. So it's not that these people lost interest in the music or what the label is doing. They just changed their way of how they go after the music, how they listen to it. And it's interesting to see how these people have popped up again and are paying for things and thereby supporting the label. That's been a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, so what are your expectations now for both for what you're doing, what you're involved in, your music and label side of things?
Well, it's almost a year zero, because I left the UK. I'm in a secluded place out in the Swedish countryside. I have masses of space here. I have several buildings to set up in. At the same time, I've handed over all distribution of Unrest to Tesco, so I don't handle the distribution of my releases.
That's not
myself.
That's not Tesco, the supermarket.
No, it's not the it's Tesco organization in Germany. So the old and still to this day the best industrial label in the world. They named themselves Tesco because there were photos of Throbbing Gristle from the late 70s where they used the pose by Tesco. They used the pose by Tesco signs. So that's where they took their name. Okay. So I've handed over all the distribution to them, and that's a whole new chapter, which is yet to be seen how that works out, how we'll run that. The reason for that is the Swedish post service is so crap that it's expensive and crap, very, very unreliable. So there's no way I could continue running the distribution myself or a mail order myself. So I had to give that up when I left the UK. That's an unknown territory I'm entering, and we're yet to see how that unfolds. As for other things, of course, no one 4 months ago, I don't think anyone was aware or expecting the corona pandemic, the way that has impacted things. So that's just another one of those. We'll have to wait and see what comes at the end of that in terms of going out, playing gigs, releasing albums, and so forth.
Well, I mean, luckily that's not your. You don't have to rely upon going out live as a sort of primary source of income. So it's like it's more small scale. It hits people in different ways than harder. If you are a touring rock band,
my income does not come from music. It never has. I'm very what's the word? I'm very particular about the label sustaining itself from its sales, and I make sure that I chase the money in that respect. I've never asked for any grants or anything. I don't fund the label with my own money. The label funds itself. That's the way it has to be. Otherwise, you just end up being in debt or indebted to others or with others. And that's not my idea of why I run this label. I run this label to be an independent person and an independent artist. And an independent label and an artist does not go to the state and ask for fucking handouts.
Because
grants does not feature. What money is here and pays for various artists' releases are money that I've made myself. It's what the money that the label has made itself.
Because you had released stuff via Cold Spring as well, hadn't you?
Shift has done 2 albums from Cold Spring. Yeah. The way we did that deal was I put out the vinyl and Cold Spring put out the CD.
Right. So it's not so much of a change, but you felt that it's more important to be self-sufficient than have label involvement.
Well, I mean, Unrest was set up from the start to be a platform for myself to be able to do what I wanted artistically. That's not to say I wasn't willing to release on other labels, to work with other labels. And I would say the majority of the Shift releases, without checking, have been released on other labels. And I'm not against that, although maybe saying too much at the moment, but Cold Spring arrangement certainly runs its course, and whatever comes from Shift in the future will be I will be doing that myself from here on.
So do you have, if you've got this extra space, is it you plan to build a home studio? And
the plans here, as soon as we have the living accommodation up and running, which basically means a bathroom, a toilet, and a kitchen. Once that's done, we have an annex which will be done up as well, which will work as a temporary studio and label office. Eventually, a studio and a live room will be set up in a third building.
So imagine you could just blast it then, really, if you've got your own practice space.
Yeah. I mean, the room I'm sitting in right now is just a makeshift office downstairs in the annex. The first floor above me already has a studio up and running, and there is a PA in there, and I can play as loud as I want. It bothers no one. And that is the beauty of living where we are, that I can go all out.
So maybe it might.
That wasn't the case when I lived in a terraced house in the UK.
No. What did you? I mean, I guess you just practice with headphones on, I suppose, and is that how you did it?
No, I did soundproof the house in the UK, but it only soundproofs so much. So I could play it at some volume there, but not proper live volume. So rehearsals were done, sometimes on a PA at low volume or just ordinary studio monitors. That was all perfectly possible. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the options where I am now are so much more.
Yeah, just to go back to like when you were playing live more actively, you did play. It was more so you were playing in Europe by the later point, weren't you? Because I think, I remember you saying you were doing a lot better in Europe than over here.
Yeah, well, I think around 2009, 2010, I think things changed in the UK. I had done loads of gigs in the UK before that, and certainly up north. But I got fed up with that for various reasons. And I think Europe has a much healthier climate for that. And there are people there, or at least there were people there, with more of a mindset like mine, that when you do put on a gig, you come to a stage, you come to a PA, you come to someone with an understanding or an acceptance or an interest in what you are trying to do, and they do their best to accommodate that. That's quite often an uphill battle in the UK. You turn up at some shit pub and there's a practice amp there on stage, and they get the hump for you asking where the rest of it is. And, without wanting to go into it that much, but I think there's a lot of shittiness in the UK, certainly in the UK noise scene, that I just had enough of. And I decided to distance myself from about 10 years ago. So I would, apart from playing in London, because in London we could set things up ourselves and do things the way we wanted to.
So I remember you did organize.
For the rest, it was all you.
So I remember you did organise. There were like mini festival things, weren't there? Like events or happenings. There was stuff that you did, but it seemed like a bit of a lost leader almost. Or sometimes like they were putting money in, but like they were not getting the kind of response you would hope for. But I mean, that's what happens, isn't it?
At first, yeah. I mean, I going back to Stadt Hamburg, I come from a background of having organised gigs and knowing various aspects of organising gigs. Anything from stage security to being on the door, to the cloakroom, to doing marketing, to even doing sound if need be, or just running the venue for the night and making sure that everyone's in their right place and the bands are looked after and everything runs on schedule. I had quite a broad education that way. So when I came to England and wanted to make things happen, I had the ability to do it because of what I'd done at Stadt Hamburg as a teenager and in my 20s. I was then lucky enough to get to know a guy in London called Tamon, who is also known as Am Not. Eventually he became Am Not. And Tamon is similar to myself. He's done all of these things as well, on a much smaller scale and much more recently. So with him on board, we were able to start setting gigs up and eventually a festival as well. And if initially things didn't pan out that well and there was money lost, over time I got better at how to do things, and eventually I started up the United Forces of Industrial Festival that ran for 4 years until I had enough of it.
Okay, would you say, I don't know, I'm trying to think here. I mean, how would you classify the type of music or sound that you're interested in or Shift was doing? Because I mean, is it like where are things, noise, experimental, power electronics, industrial, or does it just cross everything at this point, do you think?
Well, that's a very broad question.
Yeah, sorry.
Where, where Shift is at the moment is, I would say, firmly rooted in industrial. Exactly what the new stuff sounds like is hard for me to say because there are just fragments lying around all over the place. I think in terms of the musical direction of Shift, I've taken it in the direction I always wanted to, that it's becoming more morose, more slow moving, less hooks to grab onto, for want of a better word, I guess. We'll see how that pans out.
So more like abstract heavier. Or ambient, heavier?
No, heavier, slower, nastier, more pounding. But okay. No, definitely not ambient. Definitely not ambient. I mean, I'm not sure if you've heard the last two albums. I was meant to make them available to you, but the last few days...
Yeah, you said, well, if you've been sorting out the Bandcamp, then that's a good way for people to check things out anyway. We'll put a link or something, or if there's any links you want to share, I don't know.
Yeah, well, the label Bandcamp doesn't... What Shift stuff is there is mostly 10 inches and odd bits and bobs. No real albums there yet, but they will be uploaded. But yeah, I mean, I consider Unrest and Shift to be 100% industrial. I'm not interested in the noise side of things, at least not in terms of involving it with the label. I think there are plenty of noise labels out there, and they can get on with it as far as I'm concerned. And Shift and Unrest, I think, became better and more focused by just discarding that side of things and being industrial and nothing else.
So I think lastly would be, why do you think you're still doing what you're doing, or involved or interested, or you haven't dropped off? It's been it's fairly consistent. You've obviously changed your ideas up about things, but you're still involved in some way.
I think basically, well, off the top of my head, I would say the reason why I still do it is because it's what I love doing. It's what I want to do. I am a creative person, and this is my creative platform, and I want to carry on with that. You could call it an obsession, even if I'm a bit allergic to that word. Or you could call it a curse. It's probably more like a curse. But it doesn't leave you alone. You can walk away from it, but it doesn't leave you alone. It certainly doesn't leave me alone. And there are people around me who have quit or who have stopped, and while I respect their decision and can understand that their reality is different to mine, and that there's a reason for doing what they do, and it's not something that I feel I can do. That is not for me. I could not just, even if I had a family, I don't think I could just put an end to doing this just because I have a family. That's not who I am. You could call it a curse, I guess. It's always on my mind. I get out of bed and I consider how I'm going to advance things or continue things. What can I do today in order to get on with a label or get on with the music?